Well, hello, and thank you for joining Cadre's webinar with Dr. Ann Turnbull. Today's webinar is Moving Beyond Disputes, Mobilizing and Orchestrating a Village when Extensive Change is Required. Today's webinar is one in a continuing series of Cadre webinars. You should hopefully be seeing some poll questions on your screen now. Please take a minute to answer these. A few technical notes. Phone lines have been muted to minimize interruptions. When we open up the call for questions later on at the end of Dr. Turnbull's presentation, please press #6 to unmute your phone and then *6 to remute. We do recommend calling in using a telephone rather than computer audio. You can also enter any questions or comments into the chat box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. The Cadre staff will be attending to those throughout the webinar. We'd like to also note that the PowerPoint and handout for this webinar are available at the link on your screen, or scroll to the bottom of that page. And you can also find these materials in the file pod located above the chat box. We especially recommend downloading the handout now if you are able to do that. We do have a couple of new technical aspects to this webinar. This is the first webinar that we're hoping to live caption. So we're hoping that will occur. And we'll also, for the first time ever, be showing a number of videos during the webinar. So please bear with us, and let's hope that the technology gremlins stay in hiding today. So for 4 decades, today's presenter, Dr. Ann Turnbull, has been a professor, researcher, and advocate for individuals with disabilities, their families, and service providers. She has authored 32 books and over 250 articles and chapters. In 1999, she was selected as one of 36 individuals who have changed the course of history for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities in the 20th century. Ann's greatest learning has come from her son, Jay Turnbull. She has always called her best professor. On April 2nd of last year, Ann presented a very well-received Cadre webinar titled Trusting Family Professional Partnerships, Preventing, Resolving, and Moving Beyond Disputes. You can find a recording of that and all of the Cadre webinars on our website. It was our very good fortune to have her pay us a return visit. Now I turn it over to Dr. Ann Turnbull.
Thank you so much, Phil, and thank you, Noella. Both of you have been wonderful partners to work with on this. And hello, everyone. I am very happy to have a chance to share with you, and I want to do a special shout out to you, Leslie Gerard, in Kansas. I lived in Kansas, everyone, for 34 years, and my husband and I moved to North Carolina for retirement a year ago, and Leslie was definitely my reliable ally for many years and always will be. So welcome, Leslie, and welcome, everyone. And let's jump in because there's lots that I want to share with you in this opportunity to think about how we approach the extensive change that is often needed before, during, and after disputes, and how we get the help and partnership of others to do just that. Well, look at this slide and let me ask you, have you ever felt like this donkey? Now, I have felt like that donkey before in having just too heavy of a load to pull. And you know, sometimes what's just so ironic and unfair is that when we have great visions for the life that people with disabilities can have, the load seems even heavier because so many services and so many supports have to change often for really wonderful visions to happen. This is exactly how my husband Rudd and I felt. It's been many years ago now. It was actually in the late 80s, early 90s. And it was the time that our son Jay was transitioning from high school to then, and still in so many places, sheltered workshop, group home, segregated living as an adult. And our vision was inclusive adult living. And oh, that load, that vision made everything that needed to be done so extensive.
Well, don't want to interrupt.
If you can hear me, we can't see the slides.
We can't see anything.
Typing into the chat box, we can't see them.
Well, thank you for letting us know that. Now, Noella and Phil, I'll ask for your help with this.
Yeah, it might be something on their end. Please send us a chat. Go ahead and continue, Ann.
Okay, so the next slide, and I will describe it, it's a table of with the typical IEP transition planning meeting with people sitting around and two people fighting in the middle. And that fight, that dispute, is something that many of us have encountered, and it often occurs again because these visions require change, and change is often, it's easier to say that is unrealistic, that can't really be done, what you're asking is too much, rather than to embrace the complexity of change. So moving on to think about change over the lifespan. Most of my comments are going to be about our family experience that focused on the transition between adolescence and early adulthood and in creating an inclusive adult life. But the process that I'm going to be talking about, group action planning, can occur at every lifespan stage. In fact, my most successful observation of this has been a family in Lawrence, Kansas, the Schaefer family, who started doing group action planning during their daughter's early intervention program and have continued to do that across the lifespan. This is a young girl with Down syndrome who at every stage the family was pushing for full inclusion, and every stage it took extensive change. And now Sarah is in the third year of college at Washburn University in Topeka. They really have done a phenomenal job, and it's because they learned to orchestrate a village. So our next slide here is of Sisyphus from Greek mythology pushing that heavy, heavy rock up the hill. And this is how Rudd and I felt after we had a dispute with the school, and they were unwilling at that time to create options for an inclusive adulthood, saying that we were being unrealistic and that Jay was far too significantly disabled and to have an inclusive adult life. So we tried to think, how can we do this on our own? But what we learned with this next slide of a whole group of, and we see here animals, but a whole group working as reliable allies together to make that change possible. And, you know, I was out in the mountains of North Carolina this past weekend talking with a friend who had recently been to Africa on a safari. And she was saying that she had learned on the safari that the zebras and giraffes and antelopes often hang together because one of those groups has excellent seeing, another excellent hearing, and another excellent smell. And they know when they work together, they can best preserve their safety. I thought that's the essence of what I want to share, is when we pull together reliable allies, and everyone has a different talent and everyone has different strengths, then we have so much more power to create the change that is needed. So, I love this quote, and this is going to be a theme of our conversation with each other today. The law of accumulation, that the sum total of a lot of little things isn't little. When Rudd and I realized how much needed to change for Jay to have a job and for him to have a home of his own and for him to be able to use public transportation and for him to have friends around the community and for him to have the behavioral support that would keep him safe from having aggressive outbursts, then we really realized that it wasn't going to be one or two or three huge changes that happened immediately, but we were going to have to work over time with a lot of little change that would add up to a lifestyle for him. So at the beginning, let me give you the take-home messages of this webinar, that you can best achieve extensive change through many little collaborative acts rather than a few monumental acts. You need a village of reliable allies to carry out those collaborative acts on a weekly basis. Extensive change doesn't happen quickly, and it doesn't happen really episodically, but it happens when there's systematic work week in and week out. Engage every week in little collaborative acts aligned with your great expectations or visions. By doing so, quality of life will accumulate, and group action planning that I'm going to focus on today is a structure for getting a synergistic, reliable alliance with family, friends, and community citizens to make change over the lifespan. So that is the main focus. Now, I want all of you to think about an extensive dispute, a dispute that has needed to have extensive change around which you have participated. That might be you participated as a family member, you participated as a professional, but think of a situation where a lot needed to change. And as we go through group action planning, keep thinking about how this process might work for you. There are 5 what I call stages or phases of group action planning, and we're going to talk about each one of those, and we're going to start with the inviting support. And, so often as family members or as professionals also, we think, gosh, if we have to ask other people for help, that's a sign of weakness. But what I want to really emphasize is asking others for help and to be part of the team to make extensive change happen can be a sign of strength. And that there are tips and there are solid practices to how, and I like to use the phrase inviting support rather than asking for help. For you to think about how can you invite others to help with this big, big job that needs to be done involving the extensive change. Well, at the beginning, Phil had encouraged you to print your handout. And the handout for this session is aligned with each of the tips that I'm going to talk about for each of the 5 phases. And we'll start here with tips. So here, if you look at number 5 here, consider great expectations. If you go to your handout, number 5 is about great expectations, but it's in more depth and more information is provided. Now, if you didn't have a chance to print your handout, that's fine. You can do that later. But the handout will be able to go into more depth than I'm able to do in an hour and 15 minutes that we have together. So I really want to call your attention to that as a very practical guide for you taking what I'm suggesting and implementing it with your own need for extensive change. But in thinking about inviting support, a very key thing is to, well, let me back up before I get to the facilitator. The idea in group action planning is that you might have 6 or 8 or 10 people who you pull together on a regular basis, and that is your problem-solving team. Those are your reliable allies. Now, a lot of you may have had training and had experience with what is called person-centered planning or the MAPS process. And what often happens in those kinds of arrangements, let's say a typical implementation of person-centered planning, is that people get together yearly, annually, and they come up with great ideas for what might improve the life of someone, but then they don't come back together for another year. So at the end of the great ideas, then it's just the family or it's just the professionals that implement those. It feels like too heavy of a rock to push up the hill, and often people give up. But when you bring together a group and you meet on a monthly basis, and during that month between meetings, every member of the group is working on maybe one task, not more than 2 tasks that need to be done, then you can accumulate all of those little changes that add up to the lifestyle change. But with this group, you need to think about who's going to facilitate it. And the facilitator needs to be a person who can be systematic in getting people's attention and moving the conversation forward and going through the steps of problem solving. So you need a person who has some structure and some organization, but you also need a person who's fun and who can inject warmth and warmth and laughter into the process. In fact, when Rudd and I were first trying to figure out this group action planning, when Jay, I'll say, was expelled from the segregated program in our community just several months after he entered it, because he was so unhappy there that he started acting out and engaging in aggressive behavior of hitting and choking and pulling hair of others. And you can imagine he didn't last long. So here Rudd and I were needing to figure out how we were going to create all of this change of a home and a job and transportation and friends on our own. So a key thing is finding a person to facilitate. In our situation, I was the facilitator, but I don't recommend that. I think it's better for the focus family to not be the facilitator, but I was the facilitator because we just weren't sure what we were doing and we were just trying trial and error. I have facilitated a number of other groups for people, and I have found it to be a very enjoyable process to be a facilitator for people who are trying to make their dreams come true. So maybe from the parent training and information centers, this might be a project of some of the staff being facilitators and also training other facilitators. So you can read more about the facilitator on the handout, but remember that organization and balance. Then who are the people? In Jay's case, when we knew he needed change, the people in his group started off being Rudd and I, his sisters when they were available to come, some of his friends from our church, some of the professionals, such as the person at the University of Kansas, Jane Wagner, who is in charge of the speech and language clinic. And because Jay loved music more than anything, then we thought, well, gosh, who is the person who can help bring music into Jay's life? And we thought, well, let's ask Alice Ann Darrow, who was a music therapy faculty member at University of Kansas, who had access to students every semester who loved to do music with people with disabilities. So as you think about who to invite, you think about people who can open doors, you can think about people who have an emotional connection, such as Jay's sisters or friends from our church. And as Jay started getting more and more of a life, as he was able to get a job also at the University of Kansas through one of the members of the group, then coworkers, who were the coworkers who seemed most committed to him, and then we would invite them to join the group. So you can go to your handout for more detail, but just to give you that big overview. And one more thing I want to add, number 7 here, issue personal invitations. And we found that in a group I was facilitating for a young man with an intellectual disability who was in middle school and who was wanting a more inclusive life, I went to his church and talked with the director of Christian education and asked who were a couple of the leaders in the Sunday school class who we might tap to be part of Lion's group. And I called one of those young men and asked him to join, and he said he would be glad to do it, and he was part of the group for about the next 7 years before he went off to college. But when I asked him, why did you agree to this? I was asking him several years later. He said, because you personally called me. You didn't just come to Sunday school and say, would anybody volunteer? But you called me and you asked me by name to do this, and I felt an obligation. So that was really a lesson about giving personal invitations. Well, let's move on to creating connections, and I'm going to show you a couple of videos of one of Jay's meetings, and then I want to talk about the kind of ambiance that we tried to infuse into group action planning. So as you watch this video, be thinking of how similar and different this is to an IEP meeting, okay? So...
Gonzalez, I used to live with JT for 1.5 years, and we became really good friends.
What song do you sing with him, Jay? What do you sing with him?
No, say ya. You're not the mayor, salute. I'll see you later. Salute.
That's a song in Spanish that is, no, señor, yo no me casaré. Así le digo al cura y así le digo al juez.
Jay became bilingual.
You're doing better than your parents. I got a new apartment.
That's right, Jesus and Joe, I do have a new apartment. But you go over to see them and they come over to see you, which is great, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm Corey Royer. I've known Jay 5 or 6 years. Was his roommate for a long time. We were in the same fraternity together. We used to hang out and do a lot of things together.
Washing hair.
Well, we do that too, buddy. That's right. We wash our hair really good now. And I also taught him a language, but that's, a little low-key.
Takes Jay a little bit longer to wash his hair than Corey. but when it gets... Corey needs to learn how to shave, don't you think, Jay?
Yeah, I do.
He's getting a beard. That's terrific.
Corey, that's the language. That's the language.
Corey, why don't you explain that to everybody?
Well, somehow it just came about that Jay and I use this little language Thank you. But anyhow, we have our own little way of talking on occasion. And he does that and gets me going, then I do that and get him going. But I always look a little silly, right?
Yeah, only men understand it.
No,
the male roommates.
It's a male bonding thing.
It really is. And Tom has got it down very well.
One of the great things about Corey's language ability there is that it was an instant connection with JT, and then we wonder who's shaping whose behavior.
He is.
Okay, friends, I hope you just feel the sense of connection. Now, let me tell you, this group, we had been meeting together as a group for about 3 years when this tape was taken. By this time, Jay had gotten a job at the University of Kansas. He had gotten taken into a fraternity. Corey said he was Jay's fraternity brother. We never in a million years thought Jay would be in a fraternity. Then the fraternity brothers, Corey and one other guy, asked us or told us they thought Jay should move out into his own home. And we, thought, how in the world are we going to make that happen? That rock seemed so heavy to push up the hill. And they said, we want to be his roommates. Now, never in a million years did we think people without disabilities would come to us saying they wanted to be Jay's roommate, but that had happened because Jay had been taken in to this fraternity, and the guys bonded with him. Now, you might think, well, that's only going to happen once in a million years, but I'm so happy to say that the guy who was most instrumental in that started an organization at the University of Kansas, Natural Ties, that's lasted over 20 years, where now about 100 people with disabilities are brought into campus organizations and form a close emotional bond. So that's just a little bit of that background. The meeting that we were having this night was a meeting where we were really focusing on, okay, now that Jay has a job and has roommates and a home and things are, beginning to really fill out in his life, what would happen if Rudd and I kind of went down in a plane together? Or, the worst fear that so many parents have, especially ones with great visions for inclusiveness, is what would happen if they're no longer able to facilitate that. And so that's why we were meeting. And this next little video that we're going to see, let me give you just a background. Jay got a new job coach the day that this meeting was at that evening. And so his new job coach was at the meeting. And as facilitator, I asked everyone to go around and to say one positive thing about Jay, one thing that they really valued. And as you listen to this, think this was the young man who was kicked out of the only adult program in Lawrence because they felt he was too disabled to be in a sheltered workshop and too disabled to be in a group home. Listen to when you flip from what are his deficits to what are his strengths. Listen to what people are saying about him, letting the job coach know what a neat person he is.
He only has nice things to say about people, and he has no enemies. A lot of good friends.
Good.
Well, Jay has a really good heart, and he means well to all the people.
I think Jay really knows how to enjoy life, and I've learned how to enjoy life just by being around him, slowing down, knows what he likes, and he won't be pushed.
That's right.
Go, JT.
Well, working with him today, I found out he's a hard worker. He worked just right along everything I asked, and he just took it and did it. So it's great.
He always sings songs with me. Whenever I want to sing a song, he always sings. Good. Red?
He's my best buddy.
Best buddy.
He's my best man.
Great.
Best man.
You're my best man, JT.
That's me.
You're
Mom? He's very empathetic with other people's feelings, particularly their sadness or their frustration, that he really likes to comfort and nurture others.
Good. He's very simple, and he appreciates things that are very simple. Good. Chris?
And I'll add to that, he's quiet. You don't feel, with Jay, you don't feel obligated to entertain. It's just, let's be together.
Okay.
There's a formal course that's taught in a lot of colleges and universities, and it's called Music Appreciation. And Jay would be a great person to teach such a course because he is the greatest appreciator of music.
Good. I'd say lots of friends.
That's
lots
right.
of friends.
He knows what he wants, and he's not afraid to tell you.
Jay?
He's very caring and he's very cheerful. He always greets me every day, comes down the hall and says hello, and I appreciate that.
Yes.
I like to talk to Jay.
Della?
Jay is very rhythmic. He has more rhythm than so many people that I know, and he's very, very musical. Music's very important to him.
Jay, how about yourself? One positive comment about yourself?
Yes.
Something happy about yourself?
Smile.
You smile? You smile a lot. Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Right. Well, I hope that you felt, as you saw this, some of the suggestions and the tips about creating connections. That as you look at on the slide, that 9 through 14, think about the sense of connectedness, the informal socialization, the infusion of laughter and avoidance of somberness. And that is what one person said who was coming, is that he couldn't decide if he was coming to a meeting or a party. And you know, we all go to so many meetings and so many drain us and we leave depleted. And our goal was to create the kind of gathering so that people would feel uplifted. And because when people feel uplifted, they're more willing to be part of the solution. They're more willing to help push that rock up the hill because they have energy. And this turning a crisis into an opportunity, there were times when Jay would, not very often, once he was in an inclusive lifestyle, but at times of high stress for him, he might pull someone's hair at work, or when he was on campus coming to his job, he might do something that was very inappropriate. And what we found, those crisis times were times that people would bond together to try to overcome the crisis. So rather than keeping the crisis a secret, or rather than trying just to resolve it ourselves, once we opened up with everybody that Jay pulled a coworker's hair and it was an awful situation at work, then we really come together and work on what needs to change so that that will not happen anymore in the future. So the creating connections. Now the third part of the group action planning is sharing great expectations. And for so long, before group action planning, when we would try to share great expectations with the high school staff that was responsible for transition, they would tell us we were unrealistic, or they would say that we just would not accept the extent of Jay's disability and we were pushing him too hard. And you know, what was so wonderful for us in the action group is that often other people's expectations were ahead of ours. So instead of us being the one out front saying, what do you think of this idea? I remember one of Jay's roommates was suggesting that Jay should learn to use a taxi. And then after he learned to use a taxi, he should learn to use the city bus. And I just didn't know if that would be possible, given the fact that Jay might have a behavioral problem, an aggressive incident that could get him arrested, or someone might steal his money, or someone might bully him. I mean, you can come up with all sorts of problems. But the great thing was that Rudd and I weren't the people who had to figure that out by ourselves, but everybody in the group kind of thought, how can we work together, and what kind of step-by-step process can we take to move in the direction of Jay not needing his roommates or not needing his family to transport him. So the synergy of a lot of people who were creative was so wonderful in pushing limits. Now, our next slide, and I think, first, there are tips on your handout about how to kind of facilitate and affirm and the guidance of staying open to new ideas. So we move into solving problems, and I think we'll not see this video because of our time, but I can tell you about it. The key part of group action planning is solving a problem. At first it was the problem of employment. Then it was the problem, where was Jay going to live? Where were we going to get housemates? Then it was the problem of transportation. Then it, might be some crisis thrown in there with behavioral problems that would occur, or, just roommates leaving and needing to recruit someone else, job coach leaving, needing to recruit someone else. So there were always changes and always issues that needed to be addressed. And as I told you at this meeting where I'm showing you the videos, we had kind of pulled back from any particular thing that needed to change in Jay's life immediately to think about how can we set this up so that it's not so dependent on Rudd and I making sure that everything could work out. So we had the whole group, think with us about what would happen if Rudd and I were not able to do it. Now, think about our daughters. Our daughters at this point were, as I remember, about 15 and 18. And, what's often not addressed in families is what the siblings' role is going to be. But it was so powerful for our daughters to be there and to know how many people cared about Jay, and know that if something unthinkable did happen in our family, they were not going to be the Lone Ranger. And that was really, really important. Our older daughter, Amy, said that night, she said, well, I hope I'm at least 35 before my parents die. And now she's 40 and is so glad that we're still living. But for her, at that age, at 18, 35 seems so old. But as we all know, 35 is not that old. So the key issue and the facilitator's role is to ask for options. How could we make this work? To look at the pros and cons of options, and to develop an action plan. And what we tried to do with the action plan is at every meeting to think about what are the tasks that need to be done in order to address the problem that we are addressing. And then thinking, if everybody here could do one task, if there are 10 people at the meeting and everybody does one task, then 10 tasks get done before the next meeting. And the only paperwork that we had is that I would send out a one-page email to people with a bulleted list of what each person's task was. And then we would start the next meeting reviewing that list, and what everybody knew, if they just had one task, it seemed manageable. If they just had one task, they didn't have to drop out of the group because it was too overwhelming. If they just had one task, they wanted to be able to report it at the next meeting. So there was a strong sense of manageability and accountability, and that we were all working together to push the limits of what could happen for this wonderful young man who deserved a good life. So on your handout, you will see a number of tips that basically go through the steps of problem solving and guide people into coming up with a good action plan for the one or two issues that you're addressing at each meeting. Remember, one step at a time makes it possible. So our last phase of group action planning that we love, that we try to do regularly.
Ann?
Yes.
This is a question I think is somewhat timely.
Yes.
Somebody asked if Jay also was assigned some tasks.
That's a very good question, and it depended upon what the tasks were. But given the extent of Jay's disability, he experienced a very significant intellectual disability, autism, and a bipolar disorder. And for example, with the bipolar disorder, if he was in a highly depressed mood and phase of his cycle, then that would not be a good time in some instances for him to take on a task. But if he wasn't in a particularly high or low cycle, and it was a task that was manageable for him, and also sometimes he would be doing a task in conjunction with a roommate or in conjunction with his job coach, so that it wasn't a single task but a shared task. And the group action planning can be done with people with average and gifted intelligence. And in fact, when my father was in his 80s and had some major health setbacks, and he moved from Georgia to Kansas so that Rudd and I could be care providers for him, we did group action planning with him as well. And he was at a very different position than Jay in terms of being able to participate more and to take more responsibility. So it all depends upon the capacity and the support that's provided to the person. That's an excellent question. Thank you. Okay, moving on to celebrating success. We tried to do that in lots of different ways, as you'll see on the handout, and not just celebrating the success in Jay's life, but celebrating the birthdays of people in the group and celebrating holidays together and doing the sorts of things that would bring us into closer connection. But I especially want to show you the celebration of success at this meeting, which was talking about the scariest thing in our life, which would be an untimely death of Rudd and me, and what would happen. So at the end of the meeting, where you've seen some of the segments, this is the celebration that we did.
Is that one of the great things, I think, if we all open our candles, is that every candle that people have is a different color. If you kind of look around the room, they're all the same size, but they're all a different color. And every candle is a different fragrance. And Would you light our candles? If Rudd and I were the only support for Jay, that it's just this much light that could generate for his life. And as hard as we worked, or as much as we tried to do, it would still be just the one family light. We kind of go to his sisters, and they add to his life, and each of you here add. You look at all the light, and as Rudd said earlier, I think one thing that we learned when they said to us, what are you going to do when you fail, is that it was going to be better for us to light a candle than to curse the darkness. But it's really all of the light from all of our candles that make this possible. And Rudd was saying earlier, and we want to underscore it so much, that the lights that shine here for Jay shine for each of you. And that as we look around the room, I really hope that we all have a sense that one of the greatest things that people with disabilities need is to have people to belong to, but it's one of the greatest needs that we all have. And through coming together for Jay, we come together for each other.
Well, can I say something on your behalf, Mr. Jay? I mean, you have honored me with great compliments and with great help, and I always have the sense that I feel like when you talk, that you owe it to me, and that I'm giving you a great favor. And I have never expressed back, and I think that is, I'm sure that if we ask here around the room, they probably would share the same feelings. And what I want to say is that I would like to thank you for giving us the opportunity to interact with Jay, not because he's so great and he's so amicable and likable and such a good friend, but because what I think that you're doing, it is really unique, and you are pushing the frontiers of mental retardation into being not so much an exclusive disability, but more like an inclusive disability that everybody has to share. I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to be part of this enterprise.
I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
5 years ago, we couldn't have thought of tonight. And the exciting thing for all of us is with all of the different gifts and talents represented by all the different colors of the candle, what will the year 2000 be like in Jay's life? What will 2010 be like? What will 2020 be like?
We won't fit in this room.
There's light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. There's light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine.
And for everything that you've done for all of us, we thank you. And for everything that we all have to look forward to in the future, we celebrate. Thank you very much.
All right.
That's great.
Okay, friends, I want to emphasize several things. Jesus, who had been one of Jay's roommates, said, "Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be part of this." And that's what I really want to emphasize, because so often we think it's weakness to bring in other people. But what Jesus is saying is how much he appreciated it. And that's because, would he have appreciated it if we had run group action planning like the typical IEP meeting? No. He appreciated it because the support for him was there when he was a roommate. All of those people were going to help him be successful as a roommate. He wasn't the Lone Ranger himself. And that by strengthening the emotional bonds, then people get so much reciprocity out of what they are investing. I also want to say I made some comment there when they said, what are you going to do when you fail? And to give you the background of that, when Jay was being expelled from the adult agency in town and they were meeting with us to tell us that, Rudd and I were saying that our vision was, that Jay would have a real job and a real home and real friends and a real life. And the director of the program said, what are you going to do when you fail? And what he was really saying is he knew Jay was far too disabled to have any of that. And that he knew probably sometime we were going to be coming back begging to get back into the program. What are you going to do when you fail? And that, was such a powerful motivator for us to not fail. And then I want to point out, I don't know if you heard it, when I was saying, what's the year 2010 going to be like, 2020? And Amy McCart, our friend, who was a behavioral specialist who helped us a lot with behavioral challenges and was supporting Jay during his depressive cycles, Amy said, we won't fit into this room. And I want to come back to that. Now, somebody has asked a wonderful question. Were we fearful of Jay's safety because so many people were involved with him? And how did we overcome our fear? You know what we learned? We learned that the greatest Social Security is not the money of Social Security. The greatest Social Security for Jay was caring relationships. When the people in this group cared so deeply about Jay, and Jay cared so deeply about them, no, we didn't worry. When we learned to worry, and I'm sorry to say this, and I wish our experience had been better, our greatest worry had come from Jay being in a segregated disability system that did not treat people with dignity. Now, like for example, when he was in the group home and when he didn't want to get up in the morning and resisted getting up, then the staff members got a water gun and would shoot water in his face. Now that's what we worried about, that often parents think and professionals think that the greatest security is disability agencies. It used to be institutions. Now it's group homes and sheltered workshops, but they're segregated programs in communities. What we learned was caring relationships are what give people safety and security. And I would be happy if to come back on with any of you and to give you example after example of amazing, caring, loving, thoughtful support that came from ordinary citizens in the community. It blew us away. That if Jay had been going around on a little bus with 6 or 8 other people with disabilities and they were all walking together in a group, sometimes I use the word herd, in a herd, people wouldn't have gotten to know Jay. That's what segregates, is when people with disabilities are so congregated that you can't really know them as individuals. Jay's greatest safety came from being part of the inclusive world and not being part of a larger group of people with disabilities that enable people to truly get to know him as a person. And this question, Janice, that came from you, I would love to get into that. How have our daughters grown through this experience? one of our daughters, Kate, who is 37, and I are now doing sibling presentations where, you know, Kate and Amy have taught us so much about some of the things we missed. And the main thing we missed was the fear that they had about Jay's aggressive behavior. That, you know, that's been a tough issue for them to deal with over the years. But those girls, now women, had learned to be advocates. They learn to put their heart out for other people, and it has so shaped them. One of them works in mixed income housing in Chicago, supporting people who experience poverty to have decent housing, and the other is now going back to school after being an actor to be a counselor, where she especially wants to work with people who experience poverty and people with disabilities and people of color in terms of how to really have the quality of life that they deserve. Jay was such a profound teacher to his sisters. But there's some good, some bad, and some ugly that were part of that. But what the girls talk about from this meeting, this group action planning meeting, is how wonderful it was for them to know that if something happened to their parents, that there were so many people who cared. Well, what you're going to see on your handout is tips for celebrating success, and that celebration was so critically important to keeping people energized so that we could travel this road together. Now remember how we started. The law of accumulation, the sum total of a lot of little things isn't little. Think about meeting together for 3 years, meeting monthly, having a different problem to solve at every meeting, having 8 or 10 or 12 people all with one task to do. Think about all of the little things that got done without wearing any of us out. So here are your take-home messages again. I will not read through them. You have access to this handout, but you know that it does take a village, and extensive change is hard. And after disputes, when there's an adversarial element, you know, it's hard to kind of overcome that. And what Rudd and I learned is reach out to ordinary people, give them personal invitations, think about people who can open doors like Alice Darrow, the music therapist, who every semester for the rest of Jay's days, he had a music therapy practicum student doing music with him. These students needed people like Jay to practice with. Jay needed them. So what we're trying to do is to get the win-win. Now, some of you who know our family story know that very surprisingly and very sadly, after all the thinking we did about how Jay's life going to keep going when Rudd and I die, Jay had a massive heart attack on January 7th of 2009 and died in a nanosecond. Nobody saw it coming on. There had been no problems with his heart. It was just out of the blue of the universe this happened. And it gives us so much comfort that if Jay had to die, that he didn't die at the time he was kicked out of the only adult program in our community, and a time when he was so profoundly isolated and demoralized from that experience. We are so thankful that he loved his life, that he had a fabulous life, and that his last night, he died in the morning. He had just gotten up. His roommate asked him what he wanted for breakfast, and he said waffles. And that was his last word on this earth, because he died immediately after that. The night before, he had been doing music therapy with one of Alice Ann's students, and she told us it was so amazing that she was putting up her guitar. They were closing up for the evening, and she just felt they had to sing one more song. And she said, Jay, what do you want to sing? What's one last song, never knowing it was the last song of his life. And eerily, he said he wanted to sing Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. And think of the words of that song. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. That chariot came for him 12 hours later. And for us to know that maybe he had a premonition. Maybe it was just, it wasn't anything tied to what was going to be happening to him, but it gives us so much comfort to know that that was his last evening and his last song. And so at his memorial service, I would love to show you this video, but I've got one video left to show you, and it was one that I just felt was time we had to leave out. But our dear friend Mike Waymeyer, who is now the director of the Beat Center, did the eulogy, and let's don't start this video yet, Noella. And in that video, Mike said that what he had learned from Jay's life, of his home and his friends and his joy of loving his life, so much of it built around music, what he loved most of all. Mike said what he learned is we're not in the education business. And then he said we're not in the rehabilitation business, as important as those areas are. Mike said what he learned from Jay is that we're in the dignity business. And it was the fact that all of these people who came together, Jay's village, approached him with such commitment, emotional connection, caring, that they wanted nothing but dignity for him. And I tell you folks, it's not dignifying to have a water gun shot in your face, but it's certainly dignifying to wake up in the morning and for your roommate to first question is, what do you want for breakfast? Everything was done with dignity, and that made all the difference. So what we're going to see next, Jay, there was a memorial service at our church that was just packed to the gills, celebrating Jay's life. And that evening, we had another kind of dinner and celebration. So many of the fraternity brothers and the co-workers and the job coaches and the roommates and Jay's friends from 15 years of having this kind of life. Jay died when he was 41, and so I guess it was really more 16, 18 years, in his early 20s when this started. There was such a gathering, and people told stories. Della, who had been sitting next to Jay at the group action planning meeting that you saw, and when she was saying a strength, she was saying Jay was the most rhythmic person she knew. Della was the person playing the guitar at the singing that you heard, and Della was back, 18 years later leading the singing at that memorial service. But I want you to see how we closed the memorial service. The memorial celebration, the the service was at the church. The celebration was at a restaurant, at a venue in Lawrence. And I want you to see how we close that. And I want you to see how the village grew over those 20 years. So let's start this video.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. We've got the light of freedom, we're gonna let it shine. We've got the light of freedom, we're gonna let it shine. We've got the light of freedom, we're gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. For Jay Turnbull, for Jay Turnbull, we're gonna let it shine. For Jay Turnbull, we're gonna let it shine. For Jay Turnbull, we're gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. For our brothers and our sisters.
Amy McCart, when we had that meeting 16 to 18 years ago, and I said, what will be happening in 2005 and 2010? And you said, we won't fit into this room. And I'll have to say that we were going to have this gathering at Jay's home tonight, but we couldn't fit into the room. And so we had to rent a place. Amy, the providence came true, and now we can go out and take that light into the lives of all of those people that Paul Marchand reminded us about. We thank you for being with us. We thank you for all that has been. We look forward to all that will be. We will keep Jay's legacy alive. We thank all of you who have traveled. We wish you safe travels home. And we will continue to share life's journeys together. God bless.
Okay, my friends, this was the person who was at Spell from the only program in town. This was the young man where extensive change, so much change was needed, where so many people said it was unrealistic. And this is the life he experienced. And I want to go to a question that is Janice, that you have, oh, not Janice, let's see who asked that question. Somebody, I can't see the name, but how did we get all of these agency people to come together? What I want to emphasize is that 85% of all the people were not from agencies. That's, we often think change comes from the professional disability and social service system. Most of the people, and the people who made the huge difference, were roommates and friends and musicians and family, and the people where Jay would go into the community and they would always be keeping an eye on him. Some of the people there were owners of restaurants where Jay loved to go to, where they were always keeping an eye on him if he needed support. And yes, there were professionals who were very helpful, such as Alizanne from music therapy and Jane Wagner from speech and language. So we needed the combination of professionals and the ordinary citizens. But Jay's life in the community, in an inclusive community, it had to be built around his co-workers, his neighbors, the people in the church, his family, and those are not people of agencies. So it's how do we combine the wonderful professional expertise, and professionals can be so helpful in facilitating groups like this, in supporting people who have problem behavior, in getting the assistive technology that people need. So the professionals are necessary, but the family is necessary, and the ordinary citizens. So I've taken more time than I meant to. I do see one question. Then can people contact me? I would be happy for you to contact me. My email is turnbull@ku.edu. That's kansasuniversity.edu. And I hope that you will use your handout. This PowerPoint will be available, and I would be happy to talk with you. For those of you who ask questions about siblings, I would be happy to put you in touch with our daughters. And any way that Jay's legacy, Jay's teaching, it was Jay who would not be satisfied in the segregated program. It was Jay who had a vision that he wanted to live his life in such a more inclusive way. So Phil and Noella, thank you for this opportunity to share, and I just hope all of you will know that the village is in your community. It's there. And it's for you to tap the young people from the church, for you to tap as for groups, for people at school age, the other peers in school can be so incredibly invaluable. The ordinary citizens are now in your community, and your job is to put together that village to make extensive change happen, to truly make the impossible dream come true. Thank you very, very much.
And thank you so much. All of us here in Cadre are stunned right now, and I'm fairly certain that there's folks all over the country who've had the same experience. We're so grateful that you've shared such a inspiring personal story about your family and help illuminate how powerful it can be when the community comes together, when the village surrounds your child. We have
Phil,
go ahead.
Phil, when you say that, it reminds me that when Jay died, we had set up a fund at the KU Endowment Association in his memory, and the Endowment Association told us they had never had so many contributions for a single person, not so much in the amount of money, but in the number of contributions. And we got so many cards, hundreds of cards from people throughout Lawrence, Kansas saying, you don't know me, but I've been watching your son around town for years. And maybe they'd say they had a nephew with autism, and they always took great interest in seeing Jay out and about because that gave them hope. But again, I want to emphasize, if he had been in a group of 6 or 8 people going around on the little bus, it wouldn't have happened. They saw him, and they recognized him, and they cared about him because they could relate to him one-on-one. So a couple of minutes for questions.
Sure, and folks should feel free to type a question into the chat box, or they can press #6 to unmute your phone and ask the question. So feel that we do have a couple of minutes to do that. There was a question earlier, Ann, about whether all of your meetings were in person or if you had any teleconferencing meetings.
Yeah, great question. We were mostly in our meeting phase on this in the early and mid-90s, before teleconferencing was so available. That's a great way to do it if people can't come. I mean, I think there's something about being together, sharing food, sharing drinks, giving people a pat on the back, but if people can't come, the Skyping is great. And also, if we were doing that now, and Jay's sisters, one is in Los Angeles and one is in Chicago, then they could Skype in. So, I think we should take full advantage of teleconferencing.
Great. Anybody on the line who wants to ask a call who unmuted? Ask a question or chat? Type one into the chat. We really are so incredible. Ann, do you see the question in the chat box?
Let's see. I see. How specifically, wait, is that, let me go down to the last one. Often I work with single parents who are overwhelmed with getting through the day. Any tips on how to help this model apply to a parent who is burned out or overwhelmed? And I think in that instance, it's mainly the facilitator and other people in the group really surrounding that person who is depleted with help. And what I know, I'm thinking of a friend in Lawrence, a single mom who fits this description, and she and I have been friends over the years. I've never facilitated a group for her, but it would mean so much to her, and maybe not to start with 8 or 10 people, but maybe to start with 3 or 4 people and kind of gradually bring in people who could open doors for her and her daughter. I think would be great. I think single moms who are feeling overwhelmed, this is a perfect kind of support. And often I'm remembering this particular person that once I got involved in her life, and she had her daughter got a big sister from the Big Sister, Big Brothers, that this woman's mother said she felt she could be more helpful since she knew that there were 2 other people and her daughter wouldn't be asking her for everything. So often the people, when other people know they don't have to do it all, then they're more likely to come forward. And so these single moms might have some family members who are shying away because the single mom just needs too much. And with a group, they could be able to do 1 task a week. They just can't do 10 tasks a week. So I think it would be perfect. And a great role for professional agencies is having the facilitators and spending the time to get these groups up and running would be such a great contribution.
Thank you, Ann, and thank you to everybody for joining us today. And we encourage you to click on the link on your screen to fill out a very brief survey monkey to evaluate today's webinar. We really appreciate you taking a few minutes to do this. Our next webinar, titled Creating Change, Student-Led IEPs as a Dispute Resolution Option, will occur on March 15th at 11:30 Pacific Time, 2:30 p.m. East Coast Time. More information about this webinar will soon be available on the Cadre website, and we hope all of you can join us for that webinar. And again, Ann, on behalf of all of the staff here at Cadre, we're just so very grateful for you taking the time to share such a very powerful and inspiring story, and also to give such wonderful and clear guidance to folks out there. We really, really appreciate it.
And Phil and Noella, I really want to thank you for captioning the the videos. Folks, this is the first time those videos have been captioned, and Cadre did that. And you've been such a pleasure to work with, and I appreciate being asked back after being a presenter last April. So I just feel we're reliable allies, and I'm very grateful to you for all you've done.
Thank you, Ann, and we apologize for the echo problem, and we're going to see if we can resolve that when we put the webinar up on our website, and see if we can eliminate the echo from those video recordings. So, again, thank you everybody for joining us, and have a terrific day.
Thank you.